friend to have some time with us and catch up on the news. I found it was usually my job to check what they wanted to drink, then I would retire to the kitchen, leaving my wife to get on with the conversation. And when I came back with a tray loaded, say, with 3 coffees and a plate of biscuits, how easy it was to imagine the room in the little house at Bethany, filled with talk, and Martha out there getting it all ready for a dozen or more hungry, thirsty, tired people. I wonder who remembered what happened next, long enough for it to become one of the stories told about Jesus, passed on into the communities that later set down every precious memory they could hold on to. Now, I reckon it was Martha. Wouldn't you remember a rebuke from a dear friend who later died? She couldn't have written it down. Village women were never taught to write in those days. But somehow, years later, perhaps 80 years later, that story reached Luke the Greek, who set it down in his orderly, tidy way as part of his record of the events that were fulfilled among us, as he said, just as they were handed on to us from those who from the beginning were the earliest witnesses and servants of the Lord. An eyewitness, a servant of the Lord. Couldn't that be an exact description of Martha? Martha, who was cumbered about much serving, and came to him and said, Lord, dost thou not care that my sister hath left me to serve alone? Bid her therefore help me. And Jesus answered and said unto her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful, and Mary hath chosen that good part. That's in the older language of the King James Bible. Now, I doubt if Jesus could ever have imagined what later generations were going to make of that moment. Hungry for significance in every action and word that fell from his lips, after all, wasn't he the Son of God? They constructed the story as a lesson in correct religious behaviour. It became all so clear, especially in church communities where men were beginning to take over and assign women a subordinate role. The sisters were each given a symbolic status. They were to signify how all women were to be seen. And hadn't Jesus turned a cooperative sisterhood, a perfectly normal, you do the talking while I get the cup of tea relationship, into a rank order of value. Value. Quiet, adoring, listening Mary. That's how women should be. Busy, overworked Martha, interrupting her sister's soul-to-soul encounter with Jesus with her plea for a hand in the kitchen, that was at best second best. It certainly wasn't the better part. Surely Mary belonged to the world of the spiritual. Hers was the better part. But Martha, well, she belonged to the active life, which we might want to describe as ordinary living. Hers was the undervalued part. Human life neatly divided into opposites, absolute opposites. Had Jesus said so? And that became the authorized version. Mary, well, she became the model for Christian nuns, leaving the ordinary world behind for a lifetime of devotion and contemplation, for listening to Jesus. Martha became the model for housewives and homekeepers, preoccupied with the cares of the ordinary world. Just a cheerful, hard-working, hospitable sort of soul. Both of them were eventually awarded sainthood by medieval Christians. Mary, who's very soon got very confused with all the other Marys mentioned in the Gospel stories, has her feast day on the 25th, 22nd of July. Better get that feast day right. You might eat too early or too late. Her symbol is a pot of ointment, and so on the table I put the kind of pot of very precious ointment it would be to remind us of that. Now, she's the patron saint of repentant sinners and of the contemplatives of life. So Mary did rather well at the Lord. Martha is the patron saint of housewives and lay sisters. Her symbol is a ladle or a broom, or what I put over there, a bunch of keys that she put to locking up the various rooms. Now, if you're a fan of Martha, and I certainly am, you'll be glad to know that she sometimes turns up in paintings of a dragon, which according to a Provençal legend, she tamed once by sprinkling the ferocious beast with holy water and throwing her sash over its head. Try that sometime when you get to meet your unfriendly dragon. Her feast is on the 29th of July. But I'm going to ask you to listen to yet another version of that story, told by a modern woman. And actually, she's the first woman to be nominated for the position of Professor of Poetry at Oxford University for 315 years. So her arrival was really quite something. Her name is Hughson, and she calls her poem the unauthorized version. She imagines Mary talking about her sister Martha and what Josh said to her. And just remember, by the way, that Jesus' name is actually a form of Joshua. Banfield is an English poet, and so Mary talks in a very ordinary English way. And we're now going to hear that poem read by Margaret.
Of course he meant it kindly. I know that. I know Josh as well as anyone can know the Son of God. All the same, he slipped up over this one. After all, a son is only a son when you come to think about it. And this was between sisters, Marty and me. We understand each other. For instance, when Leslie died, we didn't need to spell it out between us. We just knew how to fix the scenario so Josh could do his bit. Raising Leslie, I mean, from the dead. He has his own way of doing things, has to muddle people up first, so then the miracle comes as a miracle. If he'd just walked into when Leslie was ill and said, "Okay, Leslie, you're off the sick list now," that'd have lacked impact. But all this weeping and groaning and moving of stones and praying in public and Marty saying, "I believe," etc. Then Leslie come forth and out comes Leslie in his shroud. Well, even a half-wit could see something out of the ordinary was going on. But this was just ordinary. A lot of company, a lot of hungry men, not many helpers, and Marty had a go at me in front of Josh saying, "I'm all on my own out here. Can't you tell that sister of mine to take her finger out and lend a hand?" Well, the thing about men is they don't realise how temperamental good cooks are. And Martha's very good. Believe you me. She was just blowing a top. No harm in it, I knew that. But then Josh gives her this monumental dressing down, and really it wasn't fair. The trouble with theology is it features too much miraculous catering. Those ravens feeding Elijah, for instance, I ask you, they'd have been far more likely to eat him. And all those heaven-sent fast food takeaways, quail and manna and that, and Josh himself with the famous fish butty picnic and that miraculous draught of fishes. When poor old Marty could have done was a miraculous draught of coffee and sandwiches instead of a ticking off. And the men weren't much help, not a thank you among them, and never a thought of help with the washing up. But don't get me wrong, of course I love Josh. Wonder, admire, believe, and he knows I do. But to give Marty such a rocket, as if she was a Pharisee or that sort of type, the ones he had it in for, it wasn't right. Still, Josh himself, as I said, well, he is only the son of God, not the daughter, so how could he know? And when it comes to the truth, I'm Marty's sister. I was there. I heard what was said, and I knew what was meant. The men will write it up later from their angle, of course, but this is me, Mary, setting the record straight.
Thanks, Margaret. One of the things that comes across very powerfully for me from that poem is the natural flow of sympathy between the two women. Mary is fighting the very distinction that Luke and later Christians made so much of. These are women, sisters, united against the posturing of men, valuing each other's abilities, loving and believing in Josh, and then getting on with washing up the dishes. So if I needed to draw up a moral lesson from all of this, it would simply be that any one of us may be the one. We are all special for the unique person that we are. In the eyes of God, we're no more beloved or important for our deeply spiritual nature than we are for our instinct for practical and loving service to others. And if I'm reading her correctly, the biblical Martha shows us, and Van Thorpe's Mary hints, every human is a mixture of natural piety and an equally natural practicality. There are times for every one of us